Charles Schulz devoted his life to peanuts, drawing the beloved comic strip for 50 years straight without missing even a single day. Through his pen, he built not only a career, but also a legacy that earned him millions of dollars and cemented his place as the most famous cartoonist in the world. But everything changed in December 1999 with a single, devastating phone call. On that day, Schulz was found weeping alone in his studio, telling his family in a broken voice, "It's over." The man who had given the world Charlie Brown, Snoopy, and the entire Peanuts gang had been hiding a terrible secret for months. His health was failing, his hands trembled uncontrollably. His eyesight was deteriorating, and his doctors had given him heartbreaking news. What unfolded in that room would ultimately bring an end to Peanuts forever and leave millions of fans around the globe stunned. Blindsided by the sudden farewell, Charles Monroe Schulz's journey began on November 26, 1922. In Minneapolis, Minnesota, his father, Charles Schulz, was a hardworking barber of German descent, while his mother, Dina, who once worked as a waitress before becoming a full-time homemaker, carried Norwegian roots. The family lived modestly in a small home, never having much money, yet bound together by love and simple values. Carl ran a tiny barber shop near where Dina once worked, and together they raised Charles, their only child. He spent most of his early years in St. Paul. But the hard times of the Great Depression forced the family to move to Needles, California for 2 difficult years. Those lean years of financial struggle shaped the way Charles saw the world. Watching his parents fight to keep food on the table and make ends meet left a deep imprint on him. And decades later, the quiet sadness and subtle anxieties of the Peanuts characters would reflect those same experiences, just 2 days after his birth. Charles received a nickname that would follow him all his life, Sparky. It came from his uncle, inspired by a popular cartoon horse named Sparkplug from the Barney Google comic strip. In the 1920s, Sparky was a common nickname for kids. But no one would ever carry it into fame quite like Charles Schulz. From the beginning, it seemed as though cartoons were destined to be a part of his life. Even in his professional career, most people continued calling him Sparky rather than Charles. When the stock market crashed in 1929, Charles was just 7 years old, and his father's small barbershop quickly lost business. The family was forced to move more than once, constantly adjusting to instability. Their time in Needles was especially lonely and difficult. Schulz later described the experience as weird and awful, admitting that the fear of losing everything never truly left him. He remembered nights when food was scarce, and those memories later resurfaced in Peanuts like when Charlie Brown worried his family would starve if his father lost his job. Schulz wasn't simply imagining. He was drawing from his own childhood reality. Charles also grew up with a dog named Spike, a black and white hunting dog who was anything but ordinary. Spike had bizarre habits. He would chew on nails, tacks, rubber, and even razor blades, somehow surviving without harm. In 1937, when Schulz was just 14, he drew a picture of Spike and sent it to Ripley's Believe It or Not. To his amazement, they published it on February 22, 1937, marking the very first time his work appeared in print. It was a defining moment for him, a taste of recognition that filled him with pride. Spike was no ordinary pet either. He could ring doorbells and reportedly understood more than 50 words. Yet tragedy struck when Charles was around 10 years old. Spike was hit by a car and killed. That loss scarred him deeply, and years later, Snoopy would emerge in his comics as a tribute to that unforgettable dog, despite their poverty. Charles's mother supported his artistic ambitions with quiet determination. Even when the family barely had enough money for food, she found ways to buy him art supplies. His father, on the other hand, didn't see drawing as a real job. He believed Charles should do something practical, like follow him into barbering. This difference in opinion created tension in the household, but his mother's faith in him meant everything. Sadly, Dina fell gravely ill while Charles was still young. In 1943, she died of cervical cancer at only 48 years old. Her death devastated him. That same week, Charles was drafted into the Army, and his mother never got the chance to see the success her son would achieve. For Schulz, every drawing he made afterward carried a piece of her memory and love. As a child, Schulz started his schooling at Richard Gordon Elementary in St. Paul. He was so intelligent that teachers advanced him to grades ahead. But the move only made life harder. Being younger and smaller than his classmates left him an easy target for bullying. Shy, quiet, and socially awkward, Charles often felt like an outsider. That painful sense of being left out followed him into adulthood and became embodied in Charlie Brown, the eternal underdog who never quite belongs, no matter how hard he tries. When Ripley's published his drawing of Spike in 1937, Schulz should have felt proud. But instead, his classmates mocked him, calling the drawing dumb. Even his teachers showed no interest. He learned an early lesson. Success didn't necessarily bring admiration. Sometimes it made things worse. This theme would repeat itself again and again in Peanuts. High school was no better. Schulz failed multiple classes, including Latin, English, algebra, and physics. He even scored a humiliating 0 in physics. He tried submitting his art to the school yearbook, but every single drawing was rejected without explanation. The rejection crushed him, and the sting of being overlooked never left. Decades later, at age 53, he even published his old report card to prove that he wasn't as dumb as people once believed. By 1938, his mother's health had taken a severe turn. She was diagnosed with cervical cancer. Over the next 5 years, Charles watched her slowly fade away. The family never fully explained the seriousness of her condition to him at first, but he saw her pain daily. Her cries often woke him in the night, and even morphine barely dulled her suffering. In a desperate attempt to comfort her, Charles drew comics for her amusement. The family moved into a small apartment above the barber shop so Carl could check on her quickly. Schulz witnessed her decline up close, and when she passed away on February 28, 1943, just 3 days before he left for military service, the memory of her final moments haunted. At age 17, Schulz enrolled in a correspondence course from the art instruction schools. The course cost $170, an enormous sum, at the time, nearly several months of his father's income. Despite the mounting medical bills for Dina's care, Carl paid the fee. Charles worked tirelessly, studying everything from lettering to figure drawing. When they couldn't afford electricity, he worked by candlelight, stretching out art supplies until they were worn to pieces. To help cover costs, he later graded art assignments for the same school, a job that paid little but taught him discipline. From this, Schulz learned that pursuing a dream required immense sacrifice, a truth that shaped his entire career. In February 1943, he was drafted into the U.S. Army. Schulz became a staff sergeant in the 20th Armored Division, leading a .50 caliber machine gun squad through Europe. His unit landed in France on February 19, 1945, and marched more than 1,400 miles through war zones. On April 30, 1945, they arrived at Dachau just 1 day after the concentration camp was liberated. Survivors, frail and broken, wandered near their trucks. The horrific sight seared itself into Schulz's memory for life. Although he commanded a machine gun squad, Schulz only fired his weapon once and, in a moment of nervousness, forgot to load it. The German soldier he was facing surrendered anyway. For his service, Schulz received the Combat Infantryman Badge, an honor he cherished deeply. Before shipping out, Schulz was granted a short pass to visit his mother one final time. During that heartbreaking visit, he told her, "We'll probably get a dog when I come back." Out. That unfulfilled promise remained with him forever, and Snoopy would later become the embodiment of the dog he never got to share with her. When the war ended in late 1945, Charles returned home a changed man. He was burdened with grief, trauma, and loneliness. He moved back into the small apartment above his father's barber shop, struggling to find direction. At his lowest point, he contemplated ending his life, but his love for drawing pulled him back. In July 1946, he took a low-paying job at the art instruction schools, grading art submissions. The work was tedious and discouraging, but in that modest office, seeds of inspiration began to grow. Some of his co-workers would later inspire characters in Peanuts. Among them was Donna Mae Johnson, a red-haired accountant who became the model for Charlie Brown's unrequited love, the little red-haired girl. By 1947, Schulz had fallen deeply in love with Donna. They shared lunches and conversations, and Charles believed she was the one. In 1950, just before Peanuts was set to launch, he proposed marriage. But Donna rejected him. She was already engaged to another man she had known for years, Untold. The heartbreak shattered him. He called it the most painful loss of his life. And it lived forever in his comics, through Charlie Brown's longing for the red-haired girl who never loved him back. Schulz's first real comic strip, Lyle Folks, debuted on June 8, 1947, in the Minneapolis Tribune. Later moving to the St. Paul Pioneer Press, he was paid only $10 per publication. But the strip kept running until January 22, 1950, when Schulz asked the editor to move his strip to the main comics page and increase his pay. The editor refused. After 3 years of hard work, he was forced to quit. At only 24 years old, Schulz felt defeated. Lyle Folks had been his first significant break, and now it was gone. Yet he didn't give up. In 1950, he repitched the strip to United Feature Syndicate. They rejected the name Lyle Folks, saying it was too similar to other strips. Schulz suggested Charlie Brown or Good Ol' Charlie Brown, but the syndicate ignored him. Instead, a production manager who hadn't even read the strip chose the name Peanuts from a list. Schulz hated the name, calling it the worst name ever with no dignity, despised it for the rest of his life, begging in vain for the syndicate to change it even up to his death. In 2000, on October 2, 1950, the first Peanuts strip was published in just 7 newspapers. Schulz earned only $90 for the entire first month, barely enough to survive. So he continued taking side jobs, including lettering gravestones. The very first strip introduced Charlie Brown walking past Shermy and Patty. Shermy smiled and said, "Good Ol' Charlie Brown." But in the final panel, he turned and added, "How I hate him." That dark twist reflected Schulz's own inner feelings of rejection and self-doubt. Snoopy joined the cast 2 days later, but the early response was slow and disappointing. By 1952, things began to change. The strip jumped from 7 newspapers to 40, a growth of over 500%. Schulz continued to develop new characters, introducing Linus Van Pelt as a baby in September 1952. Linus later became the wise voice of reason, often quoting Bible verses in the late 1950s. But when Schulz had, Linus read a grim passage from Jeremiah in a 1961 Christmas strip. Some newspapers threatened to cancel Peanuts. To protect his career, Schulz compromised, allowing Linus to reference faith but never making religion the central theme. During this time, Schulz married Joyce Helverson on April 18, 1951. She was 22 years old and had a young daughter, Meredith, whom Schulz adopted and always treated as his own. But despite building a family together, financial struggles continued. At one point, Schulz was so broke he had to pawn his drawing tools, the very instruments of his livelihood, just to pay the bills. Over the years, he and Joyce had 4 more children, but Schulz remained primarily focused on his work. Many would later say he was emotionally distant as both a husband and father. The real turning point came with Snoopy. When he first appeared in 1950, Snoopy was just an ordinary dog, walking on 4 legs and saying nothing. But on January 9, 1956, something remarkable happened. Snoopy stood up on 2 legs for the first time. Schulz never planned it. He said Snoopy simply did it. From that moment, the strip transformed. By 1957, Snoopy walked upright all the time, evolving into the World War I flying ace, the struggling writer. And even the sunglasses-wearing Joe Cool. Snoopy was no longer just a pet. He became a cultural icon recognized worldwide. As famous as Coca-Cola or Mickey Mouse, Linus's famous security blanket, meanwhile, made its debut in 1952. Adding yet another lasting symbol to the Peanuts legacy, it soon became one of the most debated ideas in the history of the Peanuts comic strip. Charles Schulz had been inspired by his daughter Amy's favorite toy when he introduced the concept. But interestingly, he never actually called it a security blanket. That label came from the readers themselves. At the same time, In 1953, a psychologist coined the term transitional object, which sparked even more public discussion. Experts and parents quickly weighed in. Some specialists claimed that such attachments were unhealthy, and frustrated parents even wrote angry letters. Yet research revealed that nearly 70% of children formed strong emotional bonds with blankets or toys, making the argument even more heated. What made the situation more surprising was that Linus the Strip's wisest and most thoughtful character was also shown as the most emotionally dependent on his blanket. That contradiction left readers stunned. By 1955, Peanuts was already appearing in over 100 newspapers, and Schulz continued pushing boundaries. This was the period when Lucy's now-famous psychiatric booth made its first appearance. It looked like a simple lemonade stand, but instead of selling drinks, Lucy was offering therapy for just 5 cents. Her sharp advice, often dealing with serious and even frightening topics, shocked parents who expected a children's comic to be lighthearted. Schulz had drawn the idea from his own therapy sessions after World War II. But while parents were puzzled, children adored it. By 1958, Peanuts had exploded into 355 newspapers in the US and 40 more overseas. In fact, Lucy's booth became so memorable that real therapists began using it as a teaching tool in classrooms and workshops. When the Soviet Union launched Sputnik on October 4, 1957, Schulz responded with remarkable speed. His characters were soon shown looking anxiously into the skies for the satellite. Just a year later, in 1958, Snoopy even launched Linus into space in a playful nod to the real Soviet space dog. This clever use of current events gave the strip new cultural weight. Years later, NASA would even adopt Snoopy as its official safety mascot, proving just how far Schulz's reach extended. But perhaps Schulz's most powerful and courageous move came on July 31st, 1968. When he introduced Franklin Armstrong, the first black character in Peanuts. This happened only 11 days after the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. A schoolteacher named Harriet Glickman had written Schulz, urging him to use his platform to promote racial unity. Though nervous about handling the subject correctly, Schulz listened. When Southern newspaper editors objected, one even demanded that Franklin not be shown in class alongside white children, Schulz flatly refused. He declared that he would rather quit the strip entirely than erase Franklin. The 1950s also saw the rise of the Peanuts merchandise empire. By 1952, Schulz was earning $30,000 a year, enough to buy a $35,000 home. By 1958, a small Snoopy doll had reached the market. And in 1962, the book Happiness is a Warm Puppy stayed on the bestseller list for 45 weeks. This success changed everything. Soon, major corporations came calling. Ford signed a 7-year deal in 1959. Hallmark launched its Peanuts greeting cards in 1960, and the brand quickly became a cultural phenomenon. By the 1990s, around 20,000 new Peanuts products were released every year, generating over $1 billion annually. Schulz himself was earning between $30 million and $40 million a year, making him one of the wealthiest and most successful cartoonists in the world. In December 1965, something truly extraordinary happened. CBS aired A Charlie Brown Christmas on December 9th, though the network had little faith in the project. Executives disliked the jazz soundtrack, the religious themes, and even the decision to use real children's voices. They assumed it would flop. But when it aired, nearly half of all American households with a television tuned in. The special was a resounding success, earning both an Emmy and a Peabody Award, while Schulz made only about $50,000 at first. The special would eventually earn over $50 million and launch a tradition of Peanuts holiday specials. By 1970, the strip was appearing in more than 1,000 newspapers, and Schulz was earning $1 million a year just from his daily comics. Yet success brought new problems. Critics accused him of copying other strips like Dennis the Menace, and some even claimed he had stolen characters outright. Though Schulz fought and won these legal battles, the accusations fueled his lifelong struggle with anxiety. In 1975, He received a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, but behind the scenes, his health was crumbling. After creating nearly 18,000 strips, over 5 decades, each one drawn by hand, he suffered exhaustion so severe that he was hospitalized. His hands shook from what doctors diagnosed as an essential tremor, and he admitted that in 50 years, he had taken just one 5-week vacation. His perfectionism, while driving his brilliance, was also destroying his body. Through the 1980s and beyond, Schulz continued to fiercely protect his characters. Japanese studios suggested making Snoopy more human-like, while French and Italian producers wanted Charlie Brown to behave differently. Schulz rejected every idea, even when it cost him millions in lost deals. To him, Peanuts characters were not products to be altered, they were like family. In 1990, the strip turned 40, and Schulz revealed publicly that Charlie Brown was a reflection of himself, lonely, unlucky, and often defeated. He admitted that depression had been part of his life for as long as he could remember. Even his real-life heartbreak to the red-haired girl, who never returned his love, remained with him for decades. After divorcing his first wife, Joyce Schulz married Jean Clyde in 1973. She was 17 years younger and brought 2 children into the marriage. Though their relationship was far more peaceful, Schulz never escaped his workaholism. He drew every comic strip himself, even on vacations or holidays, never allowing anyone else to take over.